She stayed with me until she moved to Notting Hill. She said it was the place she needs to be, where the cocaine is fair trade and frequently displayed is the Buena Vista Social Club CD.
And we are, thank the Lord, we're nearly there, at least when we have an answer to the question of whether there is going to be a very, very thin deal or no deal at all. We can get on with the business of trying to paper over some of the cracks, undo some of the inevitable damage, and move towards a sort of nationwide recognition that we have just embarked upon an act of national self-harm so unprecedented and so utterly incredible that I think not just the rest of the world, but our grandchildren will look back upon the last 5 years of British history with a sense of absolute incredulity. But not us, of course, not us, because not only do we believe everything that we're seeing, but we saw it on the horizon many, many moons ago. It was clear to me, and I think I'm allowed to have a little bit of a wander around the houses around the battlefield this morning, and then you will be, as always, welcome to join in. But I've almost missed it in a way. It's like almost like a sort of psychological conundrum for me. It has been really interesting to learn from people what was real and what was not with regard to that referendum back in 2016. But it's also been psychologically really quite discombobulating, because you have this continuing, as everything has fallen away, you know, whether it is the ludicrous figures of speech like sunlit uplands or have your cake and eat it, or the I don't think these people were lying. This is an argument that we'll have to save for the ivory towers of academia in the years to come. The difference between people who were consciously lying and people who just didn't understand what they were talking about. If people who don't understand what they're talking about could somehow be compelled to keep quiet, imagine how different the world would be. I mean, arguably, some of us on LBC would be out of a job. But insofar as the phones wouldn't ring, or you wouldn't be allowed on if you genuinely and categorically don't know what you're talking about but have an incredibly strong opinion about it. You probably have had a little bit too much prominence on both sides of the Atlantic in the last few years. I mean, to be fair, someone who has incredibly strong opinions but no idea what they're talking about has ended up in the White House, not to mention the British cabinet. But it's been really, really weird, because you have this constant hope that there is something out there. Do you remember the flesh-coloured body stocking? The theory of the flesh-coloured body stocking? It's one of my favourites of the last few years, was the idea that as Theresa May sought to herd the cats of Brexit, the idea that her conduct was so clearly crackers, the Lancaster House speech killed off anything but what is happening now. And you sort of thought, well, maybe it's me that doesn't actually fully understand all of the issues. Maybe there is something else going on. Theresa May is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So maybe she is party to some sort of information that we're not party to. Maybe there is some rabbit that is to be pulled out of the hat that will give the lie to what appears to be inalienable and observable evidence. And there wasn't, as we now know, because Boris Johnson ended up signing up to terms that Theresa May and Boris Johnson had both stated categorically that no UK Prime Minister could ever contemplate signing up to. They signed up to them. Johnson signed up to them. Theresa May, I suppose, to her credit, never actually would have done. And that's when you realise the theory of the flesh-coloured body stocking had run out of gas, had run out of road. The idea that by believing more you could somehow change reality was quite incredible, wasn't it? And then I think for me, the fundamental lesson was that there is a really widespread belief that because we are English or British, then somehow we are different, in the sense that I think in political and economic terms, Brexit is equivalent to the belief that gravity only applies to foreigners. You know, that because we're British, we don't have to worry about pesky gravity. You know, we can walk out of the door and watch apples fly past. They're never going to land on our head. And given that we discovered gravity, this is possibly not the finest example imaginable. But you take my point. This is clear and obvious. And then the response became, no, it isn't. And the media, of course, in this country, particularly the BBC, oddly, given that it is currently getting attacked from all sides, the BBC bizarrely caused a lot of these problems by inviting people onto the programmes to explain why gravity didn't apply to British people. I mean, they never explained it quite as explicitly or as baldly as that, but the fundamental premise has always been, oh, no, these rules, they apply to everybody else. They don't, they won't have to apply to us. They don't apply to us because we are English and rule Britannia. Britannia waves the rules, you see? We even wrote a song about it, sort of. And that's why it has been such a psychologically frustrating experience to watch very prominent, powerful people display on a daily basis an utter failure to grasp the fact. See, some things are not opinions, some things are not arguments, some things are not debates. 2 + 2 = 4. No, it doesn't. It's 5. You pesky, condescending Ramona. How dare you insult working class people? It's not. It's still 4. The laws of gravity still apply, whatever nationality you are. I've often drawn parallels with star signs. This is why racism is such a ridiculous phenomenon, but of course one that people who are in hock to the most powerful politicians and the most powerful media owners, they love a bit of racism, a little bit of light racism, because it stops people from focusing their anger on those at the top of our society who are actually responsible for all the inequalities and unfairnesses. So I don't know who's going to replace the European Union as the scapegoat of choice for racists in the media. At the moment, I guess the contenders are the National Trust, cyclists, Black Lives Matter, and anything else on that list? What else is going to replace the European Union as the things that right-wing media figures encourage you to blame for problems in your own life? I've got footballers, I suppose, cycle lanes, the National Trust. Well, have we got anything else on the list? I mean, the French are going to come in for a kicking soon, presumably, but you can not really blame the French for what's happening in Britain, or maybe you can. It's just so sort of dispiriting and obvious to watch the plodding predictability with which the most powerful media owners in the world can persuade decent, ordinary people that their enemy is their neighbour and their friend, their colleague and their relative, rather than the people actually pulling the strings and defining the national conversation. So, to bring it back to Brexit and get off one hobby horse and jump on another, for me, the clarity began to appear when 3 strands were knitted together, okay? The indivisibility of the 4 freedoms. So that would be something that had to apply. And I think that was the first indication of us believing that gravity wouldn't apply to us, because we were told repeatedly by people like Daniel Hannan and John Redwood and all of them, frankly, that we wouldn't be made to abide by the rules upon which the European Union rested. And I have some sympathy for that point of view. This sort of post-imperial rule Britannia waves the rules mindset actually does encourage people to believe that we are somehow different. I told you that as a schoolboy, I would look at the map and look at how pink it was, and you look at the globe during the Victorian era, you'd see how pink the map was. And as an Englishman or as a Brit, you would sort of feel, if you didn't stop to actually think about it, ask questions and work out why the globe had been pink, you could feel very proud. Look at this tiny little island in the middle of nowhere. How the hell did we end up ruling half the world? Yes, go us. I get that completely. As I say, up until the point you start thinking about it, working out how it happened and wondering whether it was actually a good thing after all. So you have that sense, and so that would be, well, the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms: freedom of movement of people, freedom of movement of money, freedom of movement of goods. Well, fair enough, but that's just for Johnny Foreigner. That doesn't have to apply to us. We can have all of the benefits and none of the responsibilities. And it sounds now like such a glib throwaway phrase, but that is the basic building block of Brexit. We will not have to abide by the same rules that everybody else has to abide by. So that's strand 2. So the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms, okay? The basic requirement that membership of the single market or the customs union or both involves every member being constrained by the same laws. So everybody has to abide by the same laws. The 4 freedoms are indivisible. You have all of them or you have none of them. Those 2 things, actually, when you think about it, you could probably unpick almost every chapter of Brexit that's unfolded since. The fundamental failure, maybe not to understand, that may be a little bit unfair, actually. The fundamental failure to believe that the 4 freedoms really were indivisible for everybody, and that every single member of the customs union and or single market really did have to abide by the same rules. Okay, so those are the 2 objective, overarching issues. And I don't know how many people listening to this still think that they don't. No, that's not true. We can have that and we don't have to have that. You can have this and you can't. I don't know. It seemed to me that by the end of 2017, you'd given up on that. You'd realised that was wrong. And you'd started talking about sovereignty, which never appeared, as far as I can remember, in the run-up to the actual referendum. And, of course, sovereignty is another area that people either fail or choose to misunderstand on an industrial scale. To give you an idea of what the Brexiter notion of sovereignty is, go into Sainsbury's after this programme and fill up a trolley with food and then wheel it out having left £5 on the till, all right? Because that's what you want to do. You're exercising your sovereignty. Or, of course, you recognise that Sainsbury's has power as well in that transaction, and that the rules have been put in place and they apply to absolutely everybody who's gone into the shop, whether you're Sainsbury's biggest supplier or whether you're their smallest customer. The rules are the same. That's Brexit sovereignty in a nutshell. We can do whatever the hell we want and everybody else has to go along with it because we're sovereign. I even heard one of them this morning on the radio talking about negotiations in which nobody can get exactly what they want because negotiations involve compromise. And that crucial point there, where the word compromise appears in the context of negotiation, sovereignty disappears. Sovereignty leaves the room. It becomes diluted. Obviously, unless you're North Korea, every single negotiation you undertake with another body, with another institution, with another country, with another trading bloc, involves give and take. So, number 1, the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms, and number 2, the fact that all these rules apply equally to every member. And then the third thing. I don't know if you remember when we started tugging at this thread on the programme, thanks, of course, to having the finest callers in the history of radio phone-ins. But when the island of Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement came into the equation, everything fell apart, right? Because regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland was the one that you couldn't gloss over. Well, you could gloss over it, of course. They tried to. I think David Davis said technological solutions would be a piece of cake. Jacob Rees-Mogg insisted that there was no problem whatsoever with the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the Brexit that they were trying to flog to you. All of them queued up to poo-poo the idea that Ireland was a major stumbling block. And here we are now, contemplating a Conservative government that signed up to an international treaty in January, passing legislation in the House of Commons that allows it to break the commitments that it signed up to less than a year ago. Why? Answer, Ireland. So you cannot have 2 sets of rules on the island of Ireland. It's like a microcosm of the European Union. You have to have the same rules. Otherwise, you need a hard border. Because if you've got one rule on that side and another rule on that side, then when you pass from A to B, you have to be checked to make sure that a rule you're allowed not to break, because it isn't there, to check that something you're allowed to do on that side is not going to be done on the other side where you're not allowed to do it. That's all regulatory alignment was. So I hope this isn't sounding conceited, but when you take those 3 issues into account, none of this should have been allowed to happen. Discuss. 0345 6060 973, or you tell me how you think we've ended up where we are. So that is my starter for 10. Number 1, the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms. We just didn't believe it would apply to us. Number 2, the requirement that all members of the customs union and or single market abide by the same rules. We just thought that we would be, here it comes, the biggest word of all perhaps in the context of Brexit, we thought we would be exceptional. And then number 3, the necessity of having regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. God, I've got deja vu. I mean, there was a period about 2 years ago where I explained this every single day. Some of you didn't believe me then. I don't know how you can fail to believe me now, but we are where we are. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Take some pot shots or offer up some friendly endorsements of my own explanation, or give me your own. How have we ended up where we've ended up? And God forbid that anybody should have been on the radio 4 years ago explaining why eventually all they'd have left would be fish. Yeah, he'd be insufferable today, wouldn't he? I don't know if you noticed, but I inflicted a lengthy Brexit-based homily upon you a moment ago without mentioning the word immigration. Because the question of how the referendum result went the way it went is not the same as why the negotiations have gone the way they've gone. There's nothing inevitable about the referendum result, but obviously immigration and, unfortunately, racism played a huge part in delivering it. You just have to cast your mind back to Nigel Farage's disgusting poster that he unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist. I think it was the same day, actually. One wonders precisely what breaking point we should take away from that simple experience. But that's how you got the result over the line. The question of why the negotiations have gone so badly is partly explained by the fact that the result was built on lies, but it's mostly explained by a much less toxic word than racism, which is exceptionalism. So I think I'm going to add to the mix today an invitation to you to tell me which word you think best sums up the failure of these negotiations to deliver anything close to what was promised. And for me, it's exceptionalism. It is that belief that somehow the rules shouldn't apply to us. Rule Britannia, Britannia waives the rules. And you see it everywhere. You really do. The idea that, no, hang on a minute, not us. It's all right, the Frenchies and the Germans, I mean, yeah, absolutely, they have to follow these rules, but not us. Milan is in Ashford. Milan, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. I think what's from my interactions with those who voted leave, and especially in the last year or two, especially this process, what's become clear is the Brexit process hasn't been about law, details and economics. It's been about politics and to some extent chess beating. And some people want to take the UK back to Elizabethan times or pre-1970s times where they thought things were a lot better.
Which they weren't, of course. I mean, that's the astonishing thing, isn't it? It's almost like a ladybird image of British history. And oddly, that's why all these other elements like the National Trust and slavery and Black Lives Matter have assumed a new resonance this year. Because this era didn't exist when we were altruistically ruling the waves. And yet there is a sense that if we can just tweak that and twist that and turn that, then we can go back to a mythical bygone age. It's. I think you're right. I don't know if I'd call that politics, though.
But I mean, it's all. But nobody. When I say politics, no one's interested in. Well, I say no one. Those who are in charge of leaving didn't want to put a plan together. I mean, I've forgotten his name. The one the Polish guy at the EU. His name is
Daniel Kaczynski. Yeah, well, can we?
The person who said that there would be a place in hell for those who didn't have an actual plan to leave the EU, and
right.
He was totally right.
It's probably Radek Sikorski, was it, or someone like that? I'm not sure. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You're right. There was no plan, and the people who pointed out that there was no plan were condescending, sneering, public school educated Ramonas, of course.
And this is the astonishing bit now. Now we're with a month to go, well, less than a month. We're now having a discussion about what is a substantial meal instead of something more important, such as data flows, which is...
Oh, that's not fair. Some people are having discussions about why racist football fans are actually okay.
Okay, but when I make a serious point, data flows are critical. We need a data adequacy decision by the UK Commission, but that's not on the conscious of that. That's too detailed. That's about law. And that doesn't go into...
But in a way, and you lead us into a very specific area, I'm going to lead you back to broader brushstrokes. Okay. In a way, the absence of a plan was the victory. Because the minute there was a plan, you could see it for good or for ill. You could see its flaws and its features, its successes and its failures. The minute it was written down, you could have a proper look at it and work out whether or not that was likely to be an improvement upon what we already had, and that's why nothing ever got written down. Because the minute you write it down, you fall apart. But that's so you're discussing. You're going back further than me. I'm really focusing on this week. Why are we in such a mess now? And the answer is because what were articles of faith, what were things that people believed, have come up against a reality that doesn't admit their beliefs. You can't carry on believing that the rules don't apply to us when the people are, when you're being presented with incontrovertible evidence that if you don't sign up to the rules that everybody else has to abide by, you don't get any of the benefits of frictionless trade. You don't get frictionless trade.
Because they've been told by those that be that the EU is our enemy. They're trying to punish us for what they're doing.
Yes.
For example, classic example, if there's a no deal, the EU will punish us by putting tariffs on. I went, no, they're abiding
That's
by
the law.
WTO.
That's the law. That's international
WTO
law. It was Donald Tusk. Donald Tusk was the one who talked about plans, I think, wasn't it? It was, yes, well done.
Right.
Oh, onwards. So I'm going to write down plan as your word. So I've gone for exceptionalism. If I had to make people put their points into a single word, yours would be plan. There was never any plan.
No.
And that's the way you can get an emotional victory, which falls apart the minute intellectual rationales are introduced to the equation. You are allowed to disagree with me today. And this will sound even more arrogant than usual. I'm not sure what you could disagree with about what I've said so far, but I'd love you to try. And I am keen to leave immigration out of the conversation because we're talking about why the negotiations have gone so badly for Britain, not why the referendum result went the way that it went. We know why the referendum result went the way that it went. A massive lie on the side of a bus and the weaponisation of xenophobia. Take away that. Take away the massive lie on the side of the bus and the weaponisation of xenophobia by people like Farage, there would be no Brexit. But they are huge emotional issues, absolutely immense, and nobody should underestimate their power. The problem is, when they come up against reality, they have no clout. So you tell me why you think we've ended up where we've ended up. 0345 606 0973. I'll go to Tom in Brighton first after the news. After Tom, it could, of course, be you. You can also tweet at Mr. James OB or text 84850. And remember that I did sit here, and I am conscious of the charity pot over there with its mouth wide open, waiting for £10 notes to flutter in its direction at a rate of knots. But I did tell you, I did suggest many years ago that eventually they'd be reduced to shouting fish out of their bedroom windows. How embarrassingly wrong that proved to be. It's 10:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's a political poster. Stop immigration. Reject common market. Restore capital punishment. Make Britain great again. Scrap overseas aid. Rebuild our armed forces. Now, as with a lot of things that pop up on social media, I haven't been able to establish beyond doubt the provenance of this poster, which sounds, apart from perhaps the bit about capital punishment, it sounds rather like a Conservative Party manifesto at the moment, albeit that Priti Patel, of course, has recorded her approval of capital punishment in the past. I think she subsequently tried to deny it, but hey-ho, that's modern conservatism. Toss a coin, shout heads, shout tails, and then however it lands, you can claim that you've won. But that's not a Conservative Party manifesto. That's a poster that was published, I think, and as I say, I haven't been able to establish its provenance beyond doubt, by the National Front in the 1970s. So, I guess, from the point of view of people that were supporting the National Front in the 1970s, better late than never, lads, eh? And here we are on the brink of leaving the common market, the European Union, and the reason why we have come away, or we will come away, with nothing that we were told we would have when we were persuaded to leave is what we're examining today. And for me, it's this three-legged stool. The failure of negotiations, not the decision to leave. It's a three-legged stool. One leg, the four freedoms. The other leg, equality under the law, i.e. every member of a body has to abide by the rules of that body, of that club. The membership rules apply to everybody. And number three, the third thing, the Good Friday Agreement, or the need for regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. That's a stool with three legs. You take away one of those legs, the whole stool falls down. And we are now a broken stool. Tom's in Brighton. Tom, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, James, but I agree with you about this word exceptionalism.
That's the key, isn't it?
But I think there are continuities there. I was interested by the possible continuity you just pointed to with the National Front in the 1970s.
Yes.
But I think there's also a continuity
yes.
with British policy within the EEC and then the EU ever since Mrs. Thatcher's time. If you think of the exceptions that Britain achieved by basically banging on the table and stamping its feet, saying we will not have this, and winning opt-outs on things like joining like the euro and the Schengen zone.
Yes.
That is how Britain behaved.
The big rebate that she secured
that's
as well.
right at the beginning, in the early 1980s.
You're absolutely
Mrs. Thatcher jumping up and down saying we want our money back because we're British and we won't have it.
Well, and almost the word that springs to mind is leverage. So you've done two things. You've offered up a much more charitable analysis of exceptionalism than mine, because you're pointing to the fact that actually there were some grounds for believing that we could get special treatment.
Well, I'm sorry there, I do disagree. I don't think it's charitable at all. I think Britain was extremely badly behaved throughout that period.
No, but in the context of people believing...
Can I continue?
Of course you can, absolutely, yes.
And I was very angry with it at many times, because I thought it wasn't playing the game, it wasn't understanding what the European Union is about, which I think we had done in the 70s under the leadership of the Prime Ministers Heath, Wilson and Callaghan.
Right.
But also... The continuity is also, this emboldened the Brexiteers because Britain succeeded in doing that within the EU. They see themselves, though I think probably in their own minds, the true heirs to their hero, Mrs. Thatcher.
But that's what I meant by charitable.
Right-wing nationalist in the Conservative Party, who herself. Now, this is where this very odd idea that Brexiteers have of their being, standing up for the common person against the might of the establishment. I mean, that was a Thatcherite theme, wasn't it? It was her, the daughter of
the Grantham grocer
in Grantham.
Yes, but by charitable,
standing against the massed ranks of what was the Conservative.
I am going to exercise my right to interrupt you at some point.
Became leader.
No, but this is all I meant by charitable, was that actually that is a rationale. That is not. Thinking that we can do this because we've done it before at least has plausibility and a degree of intellectual justification to it, whereas my portrayal before you came on the programme was possibly that this was completely groundless and baseless beliefs in exceptionalism. So all I meant by charitable was that actually that makes sense, Tom. It was a compliment to you rather than to the people that you were describing. But the other thing...
Well, can I just interrupt you a moment?
No, you can't, because I need to get this out. I think we're both suffering from an over-burbling of thoughts at the moment, because the other thing that you've made me think of is that actually Thatcher's success, albeit that you disapproved of it, was evidence of the kind of power that they subsequently denied we had at all.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Britain was an extremely influential member of the European Union throughout our time there. But some people on the continent say the most influential.
Yes.
In turning, for example, the European Union around over the last 20 or 30 years towards the Thatcherite idea of free markets.
And creating the single market.
Neoliberalism.
Creating the single market, arguably her sort of greatest international achievement.
It wasn't described that way in this country at the time.
That's true.
I don't like the word charitable there, because I don't think this is a philosophical explanation. I see it as a psychological explanation.
I would withdraw the word charitable.
For the bizarre behaviour and attitudes of the Brexiteers and any kind of extreme nationalists.
What happens next then, do you think? Because I heard Bernard Jenkin this morning almost sniggering when he was presented with inalienable facts about this Canada deal that they have continued to mythologise in the possession of no real justification for it at all. I fear that and you're clearly more experienced than me, I fear that they just carry on claiming that the moon is made of cheese, regardless of how many lumps of moon are delivered to their doorstep.
Well, I'm not necessarily more experienced, and I think I'm a little bit older than you.
It's a bit of a euphemism, Tom. That was charitable.
Yeah, thank you. I take the compliment.
What happens next?
But what happens next? I think it's all going to fall apart after the 1st of January in a way that I'd never really expected. People are saying, well, if we go, there is going to be no deal. I don't think it can possibly work. They can't pull it out of the bag now. Nobody can.
We'll see.
So it'll all, and the 1st of January, then suddenly people will be presented with a horror show. Now, I never I've always sort of, seen and heard people saying, well, that will happen at the end of it all because there's no other way. And I've wondered, well, maybe not. But when you look at the reality of it, the businesses who still, less than a month out, don't know what the rules of the game will be, who are having to export things and import things and don't know how it's going to work, who are being told they're going to have permits, their lorry drivers are going to have permits to get into Kent, who don't know whether or not they're going to have to present customs forms to send goods from England or Scotland into Northern Ireland, and so on.
Yes.
And this all going to suddenly... People will be present, and people are going to have to get visas to go to, for a day trip to Calais.
Yes, and pet passports and the European health insurance card and everything that got filed under Project Fear either comes true or becomes partly true, which makes a mockery of attempts to dismiss it all as nonsense. Tom, thank you. A very informed contribution, although I think we can all agree not exactly uplifting. And of course, come January, the big question for me, because it's my personal obsession, is what will right-wing media do to distract us from the disaster that they've inflicted upon us? Where will they point first? Will it be footballers taking a knee for a minute or two before a football game? Will it be the National Trust that is to blame for all the nation's ills? Will it be cyclists? What else do we put on that list? Do we just go back to the old ones? Is it all going to be single mothers and unemployed people's fault, or public sector workers? Oh, it's so tragic, isn't it? Tom, thank you. Ian's in Shipley. Ian, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. Very well. Got a soft spot for Shipley. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I know your dad used to work for a bakery, didn't he? Yeah. Fabulous. Right. I think we've really entered into the have your cake and eat it country with these negotiations. Don't you think? I think with the shouting out of the window and the fish and all this sort of thing, we don't want you to have any of ours, but we want to sell it to you, 75% of it, free of charge.
Why has fish been allowed to assume such an enormous importance?
I think it's because obviously we're an island surrounded by water, and it becomes
so is Ireland.
Yeah, I know. I think we've become very possessive over it. I think I know you like your analogies, don't you? I think the fish thing is the equivalent of the bat and ball in the playground. You're not having it.
It's also the one area where there is actually a genuine grounds for grievance. I mean, because any negotiation involves give and take, whatever we were given can be easily ignored and overlooked, and people can claim that membership of the European Union hasn't provided us with any benefits. But it is very easy, and I think mostly accurate, to describe the fishing quotas as having involved something being taken. Now, it involves leaving aside subsequent facts like how quickly and how happily fishing we sold our fishing quotas to foreign fleets and foreign ships, and the reason why some of these numbers are where they are is because of decisions that never get properly discussed or properly highlighted. But there is a case there, and that's why I thought from a very early point that eventually all that would be left with fish it is because there is a genuine grievance there, but it's a grievance that is rendered negligible by the bigger picture. And of course, to keep fish front and centre,
it's minimal, isn't it? It's minimal in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly.
I think Debenhams contribute more to the GDP, but no one's jumping up and down about
Harrods and the performing arts sector is several times the size. But you can only keep fish front and centre by ignoring the big picture, and ignoring the big picture is what phrases like "believe in Brexit" and things like that were designed. To do. So what word are you putting? You're giving me cake, are you, for the...
absolutely cake, yes. I think it applies to the level playing field things as well when I was looking into that. It does, because obviously we want to do what we want with our businesses, prop up them, etc., and be allowed to undercut you, yet we still want free trade agreement.
Yeah.
It just flies in the face. Definitely the cake, which is one of Boris Johnson's favourite quotes.
He hasn't said it for a while, although he'll probably come round again soon. And it's a brand of exceptionalism as well, of course, because when you say I'm all in favour of having our cake and eating it, I think the subtext is nobody else can do that. Because in the rest of the universe, the phrase "you can't have your cake and eat it" holds true, but in Rule Britannia, Britannia waives the rules, it doesn't. We can have our cake and eat it. That was, again, probably like Ian, for me, that was one of the moments where I began to wonder whether actually I was going nuts. It wasn't even in, I don't think, the aftermath. I think it was in the run-up to the referendum result. I'm in favour of having our cake and eating it. So if you can use a figure of speech like that, it's like standing up on national television and saying a rolling stone does gather moss, or too many cooks don't spoil the broth. You just stand up and state the polar opposite of what has been a truism for generations without raising any eyebrows or prompting people to think, hang on, maybe this guy can't be trusted. And here we are. 10:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a three-legged stool. One leg, the four freedoms, the indivisibility of the four freedoms. Leg two, all members of the club have to abide by the same rules as all members of the club. Leg three, regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. Remove any one of those legs and the stool falls over. And that is why we are where we are with these negotiations. I don't know, for what it's worth. I felt if Theresa May had remained Prime Minister, then we were heading towards either no deal or no Brexit. It was that simple. Because she at least abided by the laws of logic, even though she was a catastrophic Prime Minister in so many ways. She didn't say on Monday, nobody, including me, will ever sign this, and then sign it on Tuesday. So when Boris Johnson came in, his utter detachment from truth, his utter absence of respect for integrity made me think that actually a deal became more likely, in that Boris Johnson could tell the people that propelled him to the leadership of the Conservative Party, and indeed the voters that propelled him into Downing Street, on a Monday that he would never in a million years do X, and then on Tuesday he'd do it with a smile on his face. So I felt that his fundamental dishonesty and lack of integrity might make the likelihood of a deal increase. I think it did, actually. With an 80-seat majority, he would have to preside over a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions in order not to be able to get through whatever he wanted to get through. Then along comes 2020, and lo and behold, he presides over a catastrophe of utterly unprecedented proportions, and suddenly he can't get through whatever he wants to get through. So I don't know what's going to happen this week. I think when I say I think there'll be a thin deal, I think I'm actually replacing think with hope, hope with think. I hope there's a thin deal, because anything is better than nothing. Another echo of one of those awful slogan-y sound bites, no deal is better than a bad deal. It so obviously isn't, and it was obvious then, it's even more obvious now. If you still think it is, give me a call, 0345 6060 973. Take a couple of minutes off from your anonymous Twitter account and actually try and defend what it is that you claim to believe in public. And then, so I don't know what's going to happen. But every time I think, yeah, there has to be a deal. He's not that mad. He has to sign up to something. If he signs up to the level playing field requirements, I think that's his resignation letter. I really do. I think the what you call the sort of lunatic fringe of Brexit and the Conservative Party in particular, it explains why Cameron had to have a referendum. It explains why pretty much every Conservative leader eventually falls at the altar of Europe. It explains why the noises off are already negative and Johnson's already facing problems, coupled, of course, with these weirdos who think that coronavirus has been exaggerated or embellished, who also usually sit in the same box with regards to Brexit. So I think, and Johnson is unique, not necessarily in a good way, but he is unique. We haven't seen his like in a generation or two. So he might back himself to somehow pull it off once again. But I genuinely think that if they sign up to level playing field requirements, if, in other words, Boris Johnson finally recognises that the laws of gravity apply in the United Kingdom just as much as they apply in Germany or in Thailand or anywhere else in the world. We are not exceptional. We are not different. I think if he signs up to that, the people who cling to the carcass of exceptionalism will have him. I think there's enough of them because they got rid of all the sensible ones and enhanced and promoted all the crazy ones. So the question then becomes, will Boris Johnson, for the first time in his life, man and boy, politician, journalist, husband, will he for the first time in his life put the interests of others ahead of himself and sign up to level playing field requirements? Or will he prioritise himself, i.e. clinging on to leadership, whatever the hell happens to the country, and not sign up to the level playing field requirements? And I don't know. But obviously the phrase, for the first time in his life, is not grounds for enormous optimism. feel free to have a swing at any aspect of this morning's analysis. Seriously, I'll bite your arm off. Spencer's in Birmingham. Spencer, what's going on?
Hi, James. I'm a massive fan, by the way.
Thank you. So you're not going to take a swing at any of the analysis then thus far this morning. I'm almost getting nostalgic for the day. Oh, good. Carry on then.
Cool. I used to be a fisherman, and so that's sort of part of the general discussion.
Yes.
I definitely think the French will bin it if we don't come halfway to them. When I was a fisherman, half the boats in the area I worked on a Scottish boat.
Oh, yeah.
Which was interesting as an Englishman. But they were owned by the Spanish already. Now, our friends in the industry have told me that that's just grown. So they actually own the boats that fish in British waters.
For me, this is the biggest aberration of the whole debate, is the lack of knowledge and understanding of how much of our supposed fishing quotas we've already flogged to foreign fleets.
And it blows my mind is that I was a scallop fisherman. Okay, right. So everything we caught, most of the stuff in the local area, went in a freeze lorry to Spain.
Yeah, straight away.
70%. There's a chap on the radio on your LBC this morning who saying 70% of the trade of our stuff goes abroad.
Yes.
We eat curry. That's our main meal. I live in Birmingham. Love it.
Balties.
But it makes me so angry hearing James Cleverly, who's the only person you ever see it here on the radio from the government, talking about something he obviously knows nothing about.
Yeah, but that's not an obstacle to advancement in Brexit Britain, you see, is it?
Well, in fact, that's probably largely how we got where we are.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they don't know what they're trying to appeal.
But
to
there is
working class man who doesn't does he exist?
Yes, well, that's very true. And then, of course, when you point out the truth, you're condescending and you're treating people like idiots. This is Dominic Raab's tactic. I point out the truth, Dominic Raab insults me. And then blocks me on Twitter, bless his little consoles. But that's
he's not brave enough to come on and speak with you.
Don't be ridiculous. It's a conversation for another day. And it works. It gets you over lines. It wins votes. It wins referendums. It even wins elections. But it doesn't change the laws of gravity. And that's the weirdest thing. So there's something else going on. It's not physics. It's not science.
Well, perhaps putting railway lines back in Yorkshire where they won votes. But then I work for the railway, so I know a little bit about that.
That's not going to happen either. But talk to me a bit about the emotional impact of it, because when I worked out that fish would end up being the only thing left to shout about, it was partly because there is a genuine grievance there. There is at least an evidence-based complaint in a way that all the other complaints were not evidence-based, albeit that you need to close your eyes to the bigger picture a bit. But there is something emotional. Why would you... Because you're in Birmingham now, which, although it has more canals than Venice, it is essentially landlocked. So why does fish hold, if indeed it does, why does it hold this spell?
Because we have a massive coastline where virtually no one lives compared to the city.
Yes,
I know. We have this
very
romantic idea of us ruling the waves. It is all tied in with that. My friends, people I know who work in the industry, are terrified because all it seems to be is the coast around Dover, where there are scallop grounds, which the French have been and the English have been fighting over for hundreds of years.
I didn't know that.
And our grounds up north, we can fish them. But who's going to buy our stuff?
Who's going to buy our scallops? Who's going to buy our scallops if they are if they massively increase in price as a result of tariffs?
Well, it makes it uncompetitive. The Europeans pay a lot more for the food.
Did you know that? I discovered many moons ago that there's crayfish that are pulled out of the Serpentine. Did you know this? In Hyde Park every morning, they pull crayfish out of the Serpentine and ship them immediately to France. I quite like a bit of crayfish. I'm a big fan of shellfish. But then I'm one of those sort of pesky people that thinks that foreigners are just the same as us. Spencer, thank you. Give my love to the town. I was in Birmingham at the weekend, actually. So a quick shout-out to the manager of the Birmingham Waterstones, top lad. And there are a few signed copies of my new book in there. Also, if you're in Walton-on-Thames... I signed half a dozen in there yesterday as well. And obviously, we'd have to work out between us how we continue to converse about the single most important issue that our country has faced since the Second World War. But I am doubly conscious of both boring you to tears, although that's probably not quite the right turn of phrase, and avoiding the temptation to stop talking about it altogether. Obviously, if I'd encouraged you to vote for this, I probably would be talking about anything else at the moment. God knows what. The National Trust, Millwall Football Club. If I'd encouraged you to vote for this, I would be desperate to avoid talking about it. But thankfully, I didn't. I could have done. I certainly wasn't as clear about the benefits of membership, or more pertinently, the absurdity of leaving in the run-up to the referendum, in the years leading up to it, than I was in the immediate aftermath, or in the weeks, perhaps, the days leading up to it, when reality began to bite. But equally, I mean, I'm only half joking when I say that I will put £10 in a charity pot every time I say I told you so in the context of Brexit, because I could spend the rest of my working life saying I told you so, I told you so. And I don't think any of us would enjoy that. I will point out ad infinitum the contradiction between what people who persuaded you to vote for it told you then and what they say now, because that is the definition of hypocrisy and or dishonesty. And it seems to me to be very important to remind you that from Boris Johnson down, they swore blind that none of this was going to happen. You know, and trying to work out why without lazily portraying them all as liars. Because if you're going to tell a lie, there has to be a reason why. There has to be an end that you think that is justified by the means. So I think it's lazy and probably wrong to do that. Conscious lying is not what Brexit was about. It was about epic ignorance, born of a sense of exceptionalism. This idea that, yeah, of course, rules. A bit like that woman in America many moons ago who got sent to jail for not paying her taxes and was reported to have said that the taxes are for the little people. I think her name was Leonora Hemsley. And you can see that the Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings school of thought is that the laws are for the little people. You know, you're not allowed to drive to Barnard Castle on your wife's birthday and then lie through your teeth about testing your eyesight, but he is, because he's Dominic Cummings. And if you exercise that, or if you elevate that to a national level, two things happen. Brilliantly, of course, you get the people that you look down on, the people that you think are irrelevant plebs, you get them on your side even while you continue to treat them with contempt. Because if you make it about nationality rather than wealth and status, you can bring with you the people that you spend the rest of your political life treating with complete contempt. And that's how they pulled the red wall off, you see, by bringing Brexit into the same sort of philosophical or psychological category as their innate sense of supremacy. So it's why white supremacism is, in other countries, such a powerful and intoxicating drug, because it lets very rich and powerful people con poor people of the same ethnicity or nationality into believing that they're somehow on the same team in life. They're not. Of course they're not. Taxes are for the little people. Laws are for the little people. Trips to Barnard Castle are for the rich people, the powerful people, the high-status people. Cheap shoes for peasants. It sort of resonates in my ear at this point. So that's the first thing that you pull off. You manage to persuade the people that you routinely, after 10 years of austerity, you manage to convince Labour voters, and I know Corbyn bears a lot of responsibility for this, but we can't keep banging that drum. After 10 years of austerity, you convince Labour constituencies in the north of England that you're on the same team as Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab. Absolute genius. How the hell do you do that? Not by consciously lying, but by fomenting and fostering these feelings of exceptionalism, these feelings of superiority, an ethnic or a national superiority. And it worked. Look where we are now. It's fallen apart incredibly quickly, quicker than even I thought it would, but that is how it works. And the second thing that you do when you sort of start floating this boat or flying this kite, you manage to keep observable evidence at bay. So you manage to keep this idea that we are different and therefore we don't have to follow the same paths, the same laws, the same rules as everybody else. Not in the context of human rights or whatever other red herring is being inflated today, but simply in the context of club membership. So of all the analogies and metaphors that we've shared together over the last 4 years, I still think the most powerful is probably the one about leaving a gym, not paying your membership fees, but still expecting to use the jacuzzi or the weights, or all of it, actually. Why do we? I shouldn't have to pay. And it is, when you think about it, that's the attitude that Dominic Cummings adopted to the lockdown rules. Well, everybody else has to observe them, but I think you'll find that I don't. It's the attitude that Boris Johnson has adopted to life, actually. As first spotted, I think, by his housemaster at Eton College, who pointed out, I think literally, almost word for word, he seems to think that the rules only apply to other people. And that's now become a national fetish. The problem with it is the people who might benefit from that epic imbalance and inequality are not the people. Are not the people who've been persuaded to support it. And then we're back to Anaya in Bevin, aren't we? And the great triumph of 20th century conservatism is persuading Labour, with a small L, as in the workforce, to use their political power to keep wealth in power, voting against your own interests. And if you had to sum up Brexit in a sentence, persuading people to vote against their own interests, unless you still think your life's going to get better, in which case you know what to do. 0345, put down the little wax doll of me, put your pins back in the box and give me a call. How's your life going to get better? 0345 6060973. Or you tell me what you think has happened with these negotiations that doesn't fit into the three legs of a stool analysis. The four freedoms, the equality under the law or under the rules of every club member, and the Good Friday Agreement. Unscrew any one of those legs and the whole thing falls over. Peter's in Oxford. Peter, what would you like to say?
Again, James, I'll be boring because I agree with everything you said earlier on. Your magic word you said was exceptionalism.
Yes,
Mine
I think
projection.
So. Projection?
Projection. So projection by the Brexit side onto the 17.4 million voters. They're projecting onto them the belief that they want to leave the single market and customs union. That wasn't on the ballot paper. What was on the ballot paper has been delivered in full now. Yes. And the government owes the 17.4 million people nothing. They've delivered on that. They've left the country has now left the EU. And first, on the Remain side, that's slightly liberating because we can now think, actually, we don't need to talk about these 17.4 million anymore. We just talk about where we go in the future. And actually, the government's main obligation is to the 65 million who are likely to suffer from.
Well, yeah, but I don't. You're more glass half full than I am, because I think that the survival of this particular government hinges upon keeping these fires burning.
Well, I know, and it's of course a fantasy because that was never on the ballot paper. But the other piece of projection is onto the EU, because this government is imputing to the EU the kind of motives that they themselves have.
Yes, that is true. Go on, carry on. Sorry.
I don't think anyone thinks they're motives. At least I don't think anybody who's looked at it in detail and is honest with themselves about it believes that the motives are entirely honourable. And I think actually, I'm very much I'm half Irish and half German. I live in Oxford, and I tend to see things through EU eyes for that very reason. But the EU has behaved honourably. This business of behaving in somehow an underhand way, this is complete fantasy. The EU has done exactly what it said it would do from the very start, and nothing more, nothing less. They will drive a hard bargain. That's what they always said they do. And your point about the four freedoms is well.
Do you know, even hard bargain is in danger of falling into the projection trap, because all they will do is defend their own interests. And up until 2016, they were our interests as well.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. The EU is doing exactly what the British government is doing, in the sense of defending its own nationals, and it has no obligations to the UK anymore. Now the UK has left. So of course the UK is on the outside looking, and they have this fantasy, I think, on the Brexit side, that the EU owes them something. That, for example, because the EU has made concessions to Canada, therefore it should make the same concessions to the UK. Well, no. This is a negotiation.
And we're not Canada.
What's going to put on the table. They have sovereignty. This magic word sovereignty. The EU 27 can decide what they're going to negotiate with, and if they're going to make concessions over the four freedoms, for example, then they want something in return. Because and the UK has shown no willingness to do that, because as far as they're concerned, it is in their gift in some way to determine the outcome of the negotiations.
So yes, and if you adopted the curiosity of a 10-year-old child and just answered every point with why, but why? Why would why? Eventually, eventually, all that's left is them shouting, "Because we're British," and that's not good. That's not going to work in a negotiation. It'll win you a referendum. It'll sell a bunch of newspapers. It'll put bums on seats on a tour of provincial theatres, but it will not butter any parsnips whatsoever in negotiations. Because we're British.
Can I mention Theresa Villiers?
Please. Well, yeah, all right.
If I must.
Please was a bit strong.
Morning,
yes.
She talked about, essentially, if the UK concedes, then it's not a Brexit deal worth having. Well, I agree entirely with her about that. Tony Blair said Brexit was always only ever going to be pointless or painful. I think I'd go further. I think it's both pointless and painful. And so Theresa Villiers and saying that there's no, it's not a Brexit worth having. No Brexit is worth having.
No. That's the elephant in the room for people like that. Although I don't think she realises that yet. Do you?
No, but I mean, so many tourists have said this, that, unless it's the kind of Brexit that they fantasised about, then it hasn't been delivered properly. Well, as I said at the beginning, that's not really what was on the ballot paper.
No, and the Brexit they fantasised about is a Brexit built on the exceptionalism. So exceptionalism plus projection equals chaos.
On exceptionalism, and the Daily Mail in their campaign for British expats, I mean, as I think you pointed out yourself, the only country in the world whose citizens are called expats is the UK. Everybody else's citizens are called immigrants, including me, I hasten to say. They've been campaigning on the basis that...
Well, that is it. Actually, I hadn't thought of it like that. It's a distillation of exceptionalism, isn't it? To think that when we go and live in other countries, we're doing them a favour. And when people come and live here, we're doing them a favour as well. Good grief. Even after all these years, Peter, with somebody like you holding my hand, I can make new breakthroughs of understanding about our curious national malaise. Many thanks indeed. It's 11:15. Couple of phone lines free, 0345 60973. If you did vote for it, what did you think was going to happen? Because there are plenty of perfectly nice and good and plausible reasons for why you thought things would happen that have now we know they're not going to happen. So do take a moment if you can. What did you think was going to happen? And why do you think it hasn't? And similarly with Brexit. So absolutely, so a few people are saying, in fact, I'll read you one. James, I relate entirely to what you said. I voted for Brexit, but I now regret it. And I remember thinking that we would be able to do things that other EU countries couldn't do simply because of our passport, because of the passport we held. I don't get how you're refraining from Schadenfreude. I'll foot half the bill if you want to get those 4 words off your chest. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that. But the reason there's no pleasure in being proved right about this is twofold. Number one, I get hit as well, although not as hard as less comfortably off people. And number two, I genuinely believe that people shouldn't be hauled over the coals for being misled. I know not everyone agrees with me on this, that the old contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned line. But that's what Robbie Cowling has done there. He said, look, if you weren't aware of X, Y and Z, then what you did on Saturday was understandable, even perhaps excusable. So I will now make you aware of the facts. And if you still cling to the hate-filled response, now that you know it is hate-filled, then I've got a problem with you and you're not welcome at my football club anymore. And that's why, to answer your question, there's no Schadenfreude, there's no pleasure in misfortune on my part, because most people that voted for it believed things that weren't true or were not aware of things that are true. Which makes today's question so urgent. Why do you think the negotiations have reached a point where it's a choice between a rubbish deal or, even worse, no deal, when we were supposed to now be inhabiting sunlit uplands, taking back control of everything, and not only having our cake, but also eating it? So why do you think things have fallen apart so completely and so comprehensively? Adam's in Bletchley. Adam, if you can remember why you rang in, I'd love you to tell me.
Yeah, that's a good one. Hello, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
Long-time listener. James, the things look the way they are, they do, because they couldn't look any other way. It's simple as that. It's the whole logic of Brexit, And you enjoy a good, comparison or analogy.
I do.
And here's one for you. It's a national hangover. I don't think that Great Britain has ever overcome the fact that you've lost an empire. And you can compare it to the same sort of situation, mental situation in Germany, whereas over there, they never get over the fact that they caused the Second World War and caused all these atrocities.
Therefore, they try super hard to do the right thing as a result of that guilt. It's the same thing in Russia. They never get over the fact that the Soviet Union has collapsed. They lost Belarus, Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Poland as a satellite country as well. That's why they're still pushing westwards, because, they want to regain that influence and so on and so forth.
And another thing, whenever...
And that's why, just to expand upon your point, because I hadn't thought of this before, I'm often confused by why people get so furious about history. And you have Conservative MPs writing to the Daily Telegraph insisting that the National Trust doesn't do history and instead sort of continues punting post-imperial lines that absolve us of all responsibility for anything bad that happened. And how dare you tell me where the money came from to build this house? Because that would create an environment in which we felt we probably had to atone in some way for what happened in the 19th century in the way that Germans feel they should atone for what happened in the 20th century.
Absolutely, and I've been watching some documentaries with regards to how the British Empire has collapsed and fall apart decade by decade. Rhodesia, Rwanda, Singapore, and so on and so forth. How this domino has fallen, one by one. Maybe people they're just not into being ruled by a foreign power, much, and that's why they wanted their independence. But what I said when I first called in is that when Poland was running up to a membership in 2003 or 2004, I think we've joined. I was studying law at the University of Gdańsk at that time, and I remember an interview with a member of Polish Parliament. Because we had to pass so much legislation on the run-up to membership. And he said, that was a pretty easy day today. We only passed like 30 different acts of parliament today. But, we did this massive, titanic sort of work in a run-up because we knew we are joining a better legal system.
As we did in the 70s, not a legal system, but certainly economically.
Yes, we realised, Brexiteers, the Leavers, they are throwing, things like independence, obviously the sovereignty and whatnot.
Control.
Yeah, and so and things like that. We knew that we're going to have to give up a certain, amount of control, but we knew exactly what we've been joining: better technologies, access to foreign markets, everything which Britain is leaving right now. We've been joining that. So, the possibilities were endless. The sky was the limit. We knew we have to better our production, better our standards. We're going to have to, get rid of some of the industries, for example, coal, which still exists in Poland anyway. We still use it. However, we knew we are joining a better system overall.
And that's the trade. That's what dilution of sovereignty means. It means we can't do whatever the hell we want because.
But what does it mean, sovereignty?
Well, nothing.
Because we're British.
No.
And when I talk to my mates at work, and they're predominantly English.
Yes.
And I honestly try to understand their reasons for voting to leave.
Yes.
And the conclusion is that we are better. They will give us a deal because we are English or British.
Yes.
If Gibraltar is going, well, to hell with them. If Scotland is going to be independent or whatever, we've never been so much aligned anyway. Northern Ireland, well, that's a small price to pay.
Yes. For what? A small price to pay for what?
Well, for the sovereignty, obviously.
And that's when sovereignty appeared in the conversation, when everything that you could actually measure, count or see had disappeared over the horizon. They started talking about sovereignty. Nobody mentioned sovereignty in the run-up to the referendum. Talked about control, which is equally nebulous, arguably. But, of course, we discovered fairly quickly that we had loads more control over loads more things than anybody realised in the run-up to the referendum. 11:30. Thank you, Adam. 11:35 is the time. I love that. Even after all this time together, we still have little moments of clarity that I'd never seen before, trying to work out the best ways to explain exceptionalism. But it is true, isn't it, that there is a world view or a view of the UK, in the UK. It's why we use the words expats, perhaps, although there are more technical explanations of that. When we emigrate to other countries, we're doing those other countries a favour. And when people from those other countries emigrate to the UK, we're doing those people from other countries a favour. And there'll be people listening now who go, yeah, damn right, exactly. And that's English exceptionalism, right there. And it is bizarre. And it is Brexit. And it is exactly where we are. And indeed, why. I know this is a little bit... Well, it isn't actually. This one's particularly funny. It would have worked better on Twitter, but Guy's been in touch to call me a nasty, decisive little man. And then he's had to text me again to correct decisive to divisive, but he's managed to spell divisive wrong. So he spelled it D-E-V. I know it's a little bit petty, but goodness me, I do enough of the grown-up stuff to be allowed a little bit of schoolboy humour. So Guy tweets a radio presenter, say, "You nasty, decisive little man," realises his mistake, corrects decisive to divisive, and manages to spell that wrong as well. And Guy, forgive me, mate, no one even needs to wonder how you voted in the referendum. You've just shown us. Martin's in Romford. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello there. Nice to speak to you.
Oh.
Nice to speak to you. All I'd like to say is that this agreement's never going to happen. It's all going to be rushed through. It's going to be a duff deal. But
hang on, you can't not happen and get rushed through.
What's going to happen is they're never going to make a decision. The Europeans.
Well, then it's not going to get rushed through, is it?
Don't want us to leave. That's why it's took
We've already left.
When we voted to get out.
We've already left.
Yeah, when we voted to get out on that Friday, we should have left on the Monday. Took 4 years of quibbling.
Right.
At the end of the day, this country is going to make mistakes, but at least our own elected idiots are going to do it.
Right.
When they make mistakes, we can boot them out. But all these rules they've done over all the years.
So we haven't had a general election since 1973.
It's all been.
Martin, you have to listen at some point. Martin, we have had general elections since 1973. You know?
I know we have.
Yeah, you can boot out politicians in exactly the same way after Brexit as you can before. I know what you're saying, and you have to listen a bit. So, is the deal not going to happen, or is it going to be rushed through?
It's basically the deal's not going to happen.
Right. So nothing's going to get rushed through then.
Or if there is a decision, it's just going to be a duff deal on both.
So it isn't going to happen, or it is.
I don't think it will happen. No,
but it might.
It's not going to happen.
So then it can't be rushed through.
Well, what I'm saying to you is that it's all left. It's all left to the last minute because the Europeans, they are desperate. They're desperate to trade with us.
Right.
They're desperate because we're
where are you?
More money out of us than we do them.
Where are you getting? Yes, but you're speaking about 27 countries as opposed to one. Do you see?
Yeah.
So the only reason you can point to a deficit, if you like, with the EU is because there's 27 countries. So you add up 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 27.
Right. But I feel the end of the day.
Yeah.
The end of the day.
Go on.
We should have left on the Monday when we voted out on the Friday.
You keep saying that. You keep saying that, Martin. But what about customs? If we'd left on the Monday, what do you think would have happened at our ports?
There is going to be problems to start with, but in the long run, this country will be so much better.
Yeah.
We make all our own decisions.
What are you most looking forward to?
Right or wrong.
What are you most looking forward to?
To all make our own decisions, whether they're right or wrong, rather some little tiny Principality of Luxembourg telling us what to do.
When did they do that? When did they do that? I missed that.
Many years.
Yeah, go on. When did they do that? What did they tell us to do?
What to do.
What did they tell us to do that we didn't want to do?
We can make our own mistakes.
I can't wait, mate.
And we can make our own good decisions.
Before you go, what was the worst thing Luxembourg made us do?
I'm just saying.
I know. You're telling me how awful it is, but what was the worst rule they made?
Why has it took him 4 years to get out of it?
I don't know, mate. I just want to know. It's not a trick question. What was the very worst thing that those pesky principalities...
They shouldn't have been telling us to do anything.
You're damn right they shouldn't. So what did they tell us to do? What did they tell us to do, Martin? What rules did they make?
Country, how we run our lives.
What did they tell us to do?
It should have been trade only.
Yeah, I know.
They're still discussing about whether they can fish in our waters.
Oh, it's nuts, isn't it?
Never happened.
Before you go, what was the worst thing that Luxembourg made us do?
I don't care. In the end of the day, I don't care what decisions they made. They shouldn't be making any decisions.
So what decisions did they make for us?
At the end of the day, we voted to get out.
All
this nonsense in the media about we was lied to. A lot of people just wanted to take back control.
Of what?
That's all. Our own decisions.
What decisions?
Our own decisions.
What decisions?
Trade, where we,
What?
everything. We should
but
make
for
our
example,
own decisions. A local government and the government, not some unelected nobody in Luxembourg.
No, I know.
It's one of the best things this country's ever done.
I couldn't agree more. Down with Luxembourg. Before you go, the worst thing that the pesky Principality of Luxembourg made us do,
Principality of Luxembourg.
Down with them and all who sail in them. But what's the worst thing?
They're still arguing now. We want to fish in your waters.
I know.
We want to do this. We want to do
unbelievable.
that. We should just trade only. That's it.
Yeah.
WTO. We just trade with them.
Yeah.
At least we ain't got to abide by all the rules. All these unelected
do you know the WTO?
Tell us what to do.
The WTO has really strict rules.
It's the best thing that's happened.
I know. It's great. I can't wait. But I just need to tell you one thing before you go. Before you go.
The EU will crumble.
Before you go. Oh, the EU's going to crumble.
It's going to crumble.
It's going to crumble. Before you go, are you familiar with the WTO rules?
I don't. It probably will cost us more money. It will cost us more money.
I'll take that as a no. Sarah's in Tunbridge. Sarah, what would you like? I nearly said question or answer there because it all felt a bit like mystery hour back then. But Sarah, what would you like to say?
Well, I hadn't realised we'd been run by Luxembourg for all these years. I thought we were an extremely powerful country who could do it alone. We won the last war, apparently, all on our own.
1966.
We took over half the world, apparently all on our own, as opposed to raping the rest of the countries and stealing all their goods with Luxembourg.
Why, love and respect to Martin, why do you think the negotiations have ended up with essentially a choice between a really flimsy deal or no deal at all?
Well, because it was a crummy idea in the beginning. But can I get back? I'll get back to exceptionalism.
Yes, please.
You see, this is the great problem. You see, if you teach children, I'm 75, and all my life I was taught that, we were propagandized that, the empire we had, really because we're altruistic. We
did the world a favour.
Yes,
we did the world a favour. I think my generation, because I'm 48, and that's an interesting 25 years between you and me, because I don't have that. And most of the people of my generation that do have it, in the context of Brexit, the prominent politicians, they grew up overseas. They grew up in places like what is now Zimbabwe or South Africa or I think in Daniel Hannan's case, Peru. So you could only really sustain that notion of English exceptionalism after we stopped teaching it if you lived somewhere else and it was still...
Yeah, but for instance, I just finished reading Akala's fantastic, and I know you've interviewed him,
yes.
Natives, which I think should be mandatory in every fifth and sixth form, because that really is teaching a lot.
Right.
Because, I mean, you just pointed out all this appalling right-wing stuff. The National Trust must not tell us about how we got... it's wicked if they start telling us how...
Historic houses should not do history. I think we can all agree on that, Sarah.
I know. It's absolutely true. And Millwall, you mustn't bend the knee. I mean, whether these people would actually ever get around to reading
Excuse
the book...
me, I think... it's all very well picking on those two examples. I think you're underestimating the importance of cycle lanes to the national pageant at the moment, Sarah.
Yes, you see, because... this is how power works. If you're a cyclist and do something wrong, every motorist can get on the radio and say how appalling cyclists are. Because they're, in reality, they have to go on our terrifying roads. And the big boys, the ones like me in a car...
Yes, you have all the power. You have all the power, and it's not enough. You also want to be able to wipe out the people with less power. Sarah, you've taken me all the way up to the news, or at least to the break. Simon Calder's been in touch, the doyen of travel correspondence. I mention that because his qualifications for the contribution he makes to the programme are impeccable. He tells us Luxembourg is not a pesky principality. It is, in fact, a grand duchy. It was also the first country in the world with completely free public transport. The crafty villains. What did you think was going to happen by now if you voted for Brexit? Because I suppose you could call me and claim that you knew that this was going to happen, but then oddly you'd be in complete agreement with me, because I started explaining about 3 years ago why eventually all you'd have left to shout about would be fish. But that might be fun. Give me a buzz. Or if you're, dare I say, a little bit more honest or a little bit more open-eyed, clear-eyed, you could give me a ring and tell me where you actually thought we'd be, what you actually thought would happen. Because the choice between a pretty rubbish deal or, even worse, no deal at all certainly wasn't, to my mind, what anybody voted for. And the idea that Boris Johnson is now essentially in charge of making that decision, chilling, isn't it? Or not. I mean, give me a ring and tell me why it's actually brilliant. And this is exactly what you were looking forward to most. And you are already halfway up the sunlit uplands while simultaneously having your cake and eating it. I feel bad for keeping Kevin on hold because he's been there for ages. So I might take Kevin's call briefly, or seeing as he's in France, vite, and then we'll turn to our political editor, Theo Usherwood, for an update on, presumably, Theo, in a word...
Lots happening.
Nothing's happened. Nothing at all. Nothing's happened. Theo will be here with an urgent update shortly to tell us nothing. And that's Brexit in yet another nutshell. Kevin is in the Three Valleys in France, in the Alps indeed. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
Just really ring up to agree with you.
Oh.
Regarding...
Even I'm getting bored with people agreeing with me, Kevin. Not with you personally, but I would quite like to have a bit of a chat. I mean, someone to say it's all going brilliantly, and I knew it would, and this is exactly what I voted for.
Well, maybe you should give Martin a call back. He'll tell you how well it's doing.
Bless him. How's things in France, anyway? How are you getting on?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Obviously, a different perspective over here of Brexit. I don't think anyone over here really wants it. I don't hear anyone talking about fishing, but I'm not completely fluent, so maybe they are, and I'm just not getting it.
And you're not by the coast either. I mean, the French fishing, it's politically toxic for Macron to tell French fishing folk that they will have less fish to catch in the future. But the exceptionalism thing intrigues me the most.
Although a lot of people still believe in it, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's something that's pushed about by the right-wing media.
But it works. Do you not feel it at all? Because I'll tell you what happened the other day. When the vaccine was announced, and after 2020, I'm dancing around the studio. This is just such fantastic news. Finally, we can go on the radio with good news. There's a slight concern in the back of my mind. Why have we gone quicker than everybody else on the planet? But I have faith in the public health professionals who explained why, rather than subscribing to the notion that they'd been pushed into it by politicians.
Yeah.
And then Anthony Fauci, for whom up until that point I had nothing but the most enormous admiration, because to do the job that he's done while ostensibly working for Donald Trump it takes epic integrity and courage, I think, and clarity. And then a European Union diplomat, who I don't think was named, both expressed misgivings about the speed with which we'd passed the vaccine. And I felt my heckles rising. I felt, hang on a minute, I'm allowed to worry about this, but you're not allowed to tell me, you foreign person, whether you're American or Polish or... And that, I think, is a little seed that if you watered it and nurtured it and subscribed to the right newspapers, that seed could actually grow into quite a big tree where you would think, hang on a minute, how dare you? You're foreign, you can't... Do you see? Or am I being daft?
Yeah, it doesn't take much.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Does it really? And obviously where we are now, the press have already laid the blame at the EU. So really, the Brexiteers can't actually lose anymore because... it's win-win. You know, it's not their fault they voted for it because they thought it was going to be fantastic, and now it's not going to be fantastic. It's the fault of the EU. So, in a way,
that will float because the alternative is to admit an error.
Yeah,
quite a few people. There's a text here asking if you've got a spare room, Kevin.
Well, funny enough, yes.
We'll find out more about that at a later date. Kevin, take care. The problem I've got now is if I say, what are you most looking forward to as a Brexit supporter, is it sounds facetious. I don't know when that became true, because I would genuinely have meant it as a question a few years ago. What are you most looking forward to? And if you were a fisherman, perhaps, in Cornwall, a lot of you are pointing out that Luxembourg is landlocked. Therefore, it is unlikely that their fishermen and women had grand designs upon the English Channel. I didn't think that needed to be pointed out. There was enough going on. But what are you most looking forward to and why, as in the improvements to your own life? It's going to sound close to facetious, but if you want to take that question in the spirit that it's asked, which is in good faith, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. Challenge the idea that things have gone badly, please. If you're still persuaded that this is all part of the plan, this is exactly what you knew was going to happen and exactly what you wanted, then 0345 60973 is the number that you need. Listen back if you want to my call with Martin. I can assure you of my politeness at all times. And then, I guess, the question of why you think it's come to this. I'm not clear yet on when pennies drop, who's going to get the blame for what the Brexiters have done to the country, because I'm fairly confident unless the ownership of every newspaper in the land changes hands overnight, then it's not going to be the people who did it. I saw one thing. Mandelson made a comment last week that some people jumped on, a suggestion that people who were keen to secure a second referendum bore responsibility for the current state of affairs. That was interesting for two reasons. The first is that everybody jumping on it, possibly without realising it, and saying, yeah, it's all the Remainers' fault, is actually admitting that it's all gone horribly wrong, which in other contexts they're not actually ready to admit yet. And the second thing is Mandelson was just wrong. This is the problem with footballification. People who think Peter Mandelson has been wrong about everything for his entire life, he says something that they would love to agree with if it was true, so they'll pretend it was true and that he's a genius. Mandelson hovered way above. From Lancaster House onwards, from the Red Lines, from the abolition of the freedom of movement, where we are now became inevitable. There was nothing else to do except try to get another vote. As Jacob Rees-Mogg famously observed, and for once quite correctly, you have a vote on whether you want a referendum, and then you have on whether you want to leave, and then if you do say, yes, we want to leave, you have another vote on what it looks like, once it's been written down. So we should, at the end of this week, have another referendum. We can't, just for the record, before anybody gets their hopes up. That is clearly what should have happened. So if a deal is negotiated, we get the deal explained to us in detail and we decide, is that better than staying in? And if there's no deal, we have a proper understanding of the consequences of that and we decide whether or not that is better than staying in. Okay? And now, I don't know whether anyone's going to look me in the eye and tell me that if we actually end up with no deal and you had a referendum on that, you'd still see a victory for the 52%. I just don't know. 7 after 12 is the time. Mervyn is in Croydon. Mervyn, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've got quite a simple philosophy, and I want a no deal on the grounds that I want to retain control over our fishing waters. And the other thing is, Are you in the industry? Are you linked with fishing? No, I'm not.
Well, why do you feel so strongly about it, do you think?
I'm 74. Yeah, well, I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force for 20 years, and I have a simple view of things. But what I want to now say...
I just want to know why fish is so important to you, fishing waters.
Because... if I owned a fishing pool that I rented out and let people come and fish in, yes. I wouldn't want a load of interlopers coming and saying, oh, because we used to have an agreement years ago, I can still come here.
But no one's saying that. We had an agreement. Just out of interest, how many fishing vessels do you think are registered in the UK, just as a ballpark figure?
I used to work up near Grimsby, and I used to know Grimsby when it was bubbling with fishing vessels, and I know that for whatever silly reason, British people sold off the rights to fish in British waters.
So that's not the EU's fault, is it?
No, and that was the mistake of the people around at the time.
Well, that's freedom, though. It is, I own something, I'm free to sell it to whoever I want, aren't I? But just as a ballpark figure, how many vessels do you think there are at them? Because, I mean, it sounds like I'm haranguing you, but I don't understand this deep prioritisation of fishing that you've described yourself as feeling. So how much do you know about the fishing industry to justify the conclusion that it's more important than many other issues or areas?
When I was a fighter pilot, I used to fly over the North Sea, and I used to see the Grimsby fleet go out. Yes. And there were hundreds of boats at the time in the 70s and 80s. How many are
We were in the European Union in the 70s and 80s, or we were in its predecessor, of course.
But as
I do want to... Yeah.
When you add them all up together, there's probably 500 or a couple of thousand.
Yeah, it's 5,911.
Yeah.
So 10 times what you suggested?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me again why it's so important, if you would.
That's one of the things, but no deal. Europe sells twice as much to us as we to them,
yes,
and we will make a profit on the import duties. That was the point I wanted to get across as well.
No, the tariffs will be imposed upon us for the fish coming into this country.
That's on the fishing side of things.
Yes.
But of general goods, Europe sells twice as much to us,
yes,
as we to them.
But you're presuming it will just carry on doing so, rather than selling more into markets where there aren't any tariffs, i.e. for each individual European Union member, the other 26 European Union members.
So on that basis,
yes,
that if things carried on, we would make a profit on the import duties.
Yes, but people aren't going to carry on exporting fish into this country if there are tariffs. They're going to look for markets where there aren't any tariffs, i.e. the other 26 countries that will retain membership, Marvin.
Well, that's your viewpoint. And
well, what would you do? If it was you, if you were in business, and at the moment there are 27 countries into which you can sell without tariffs, and tomorrow there'll be 26, what would you do with the country where it's suddenly going to be more expensive to do business? Would you just carry on as you are, or would you look to the other markets where it will continue to be frictionless?
But I don't think Europe, on the fish side, sells that much fish to us.
You just said it sells twice as much as we sell to them. No,
on general merchandise and things like that.
Well, I mean, then I have to correct you. If with your permission, we are a net importer of fish. We import more than we export, Marvin.
Okay, and I'd spend a lot of time going around Scotland, and all the fishing ports around there. You've got Spanish trucks, and they're just waiting for the trawlers to come in. It gets loaded on the trucks, and it goes down to Spain. And I've only seen a TV program, but Heathrow sells millions of pounds of smoked salmon to the whole world.
Yes.
And
well, not Heathrow exactly. I don't think that's a
no. That's where it gets.
It's the airport where the planes take off from. Anyway, we did just gloss over. I mean, you rang in to make a point that was contingent upon the belief that we're a net exporter of fish. You've now discovered that we're a net importer of fish. I think in 2019, I think we imported, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, 721,000 tonnes of sea fish with a value of £3,457 million. We exported, I think, 400, off the top of my head, 452,000 tonnes with a value of £2,004 million. So your premise, when you kindly rang in, was that you support no deal because we import more fish than because we export more fish than we import. That's categorically untrue. So presumably you've now changed your mind.
On the fish side of things, but on the general merchandise of selling cars...
You rang in to talk about fish. Your exact phrase, I think, was that we'll have our waters back.
Yes.
That's got nothing to do with cars, has it?
No. And the second point I made was that Europe sells twice as much to us. Okay, it wasn't made exactly clear that I was talking about general merchandise.
Well, no, fish. Because you said fish.
We started off with fish.
Yes. That's all right. So you're still confident that we're going to be better off then?
That would be my viewpoint.
Excellent. Oh, good. Let's hope you're right, Marvin. I think we would all join in that fervent hope. If only there'd been perhaps a scintilla of evidence to support your optimism, then we could be even more supportive of your view. Steve's in Shrewsbury. Steve, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello, Steve.
I just have to say I find the thought of that guy being in charge of some of the Royal Air Force's finest armoury quite scary.
Well, I don't. I understand why you're saying that, but his understanding of fishing has nothing to do with his bravery or courage while flying in the RAF. But I'm not having a go at either of you today, as you'll notice.
And this is where kind of my point is, because you are a much better and kinder and nicer person than I am, because I'm really basically a bitter old man. And when I hear people like Martin earlier on ranting on, it just shows me why we're in this mess.
Yeah.
Because the only people stupid enough to vote for Conservatives nowadays are the same people who are stupid enough to still think that Brexit's a good idea.
Well, I feel bad now, especially now you've warned me that you're a bitter old man. I don't want to get my head tilted, but I struggle, I'm afraid, to condemn the Conservative voter of December as clearly as you do because of what the options were, actually. And that is a deeply held, sincere view, and I can prove it because I now get more abuse from Jeremy Corbyn fans than I do from Brexiteers.
That is a very fair point, because the options were appalling. However, even Corbyn, and that's really saying something that sticks in my throat, is better than this shower of clowns. But it reminds me that earlier on you were talking about the football manager and how, having explained the reason of taking a knee, if you still took offence to it, then you weren't welcome. And my viewpoint is that if people still, despite all the evidence, thinks Brexit's going to be great, and it is great, and keep saying it's great, then, quite frankly, I have no trouble saying you're an idiot or a racist.
So the compassion for the conned is extended only to people who admit that they've been conned. You see, you're right, I am a much better, nicer kind of person than you, because I work on I think this is actually, and just to really put a cat among the pigeons, I think this is because I was I came up through Catholic schools. I believe in...
So did I.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, well, that didn't work out. So did I. I was in the Guild of St. Stephen, I'll have you know. I've still got a medal somewhere. But I believe so I believe eventually everyone will admit that they've been conned. Which perhaps makes me naive, not nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I also believe in profound evil, although I'm not Christian anymore, but I also believe that, people are sometimes evil, and quite definitely people are sometimes stupid.
Well, definitely people can be stupid, and they can do evil things.
Yes.
So, I can't really pick much by way of criticism in what you've said about now that the curtains have been opened, if you're still denying... Well, it's Emperor's New Clothes territory, Steve, isn't it? They're still saying the Emperor's wearing clothes.
When there is so clearly, obviously, as you like to put it, his fluffy buttocks or whatever it is, the expression you use, waggling around, and various other bits of his anatomy.
Quivering buttocks right in front of your nose, and you still claim he's wearing an ornament. Yes.
I mean, it's just sheer stupidity. And, I mean, Martin, I don't like to... I know you don't like people naming particular callers, but I'm afraid Martin is a classic example.
At the end of the day, Steve, you might be right. Thank you for the call. It's 12:17. Some texts and tweets. This is a good one from Dave in Coventry. He writes, how ignorant can Jobsworth be? And he's put the first three letters of Jobsworth, J-O-B, in capitals, because those are my initials, you see. That's good, yeah? Jobsworth, J-O-B's worth, yeah. The only reason that we import more fish into the UK than we sell is because we need to buy back the fish that the French took from our waters in the first place. Why does he spin every comment from a Brexit supporter into something that it's not? It's a very good question. He's absolutely right. The reason that we have to import so much fish is exactly because we have to buy it back from the French who've taken it from our waters. It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that we export about 70% of our catch, Dave in Coventry. Off the top of my head, 452,000 tonnes that we export every year out of the 622,000 that we catch. Just off the top of my head. So, yeah, you're right, Dave. That's why we have to import so much. Oh, no, hang on. If we're exporting 452,000 tonnes of fish a year... Oh, just. Anyway, the thing about my initials, that was really good. That was really funny. Chris has been in touch to say they just won't let us do what we voted for, which was get out. We're already out. Beginning to see why these people don't ring me up anymore. Are you? And finally, why don't you pack up and move to France or Germany? You would be happier there as you're anti-British. All right. No prizes for guessing how our friend spelt your. But the short answer is, in my case, I probably could if I wanted to, but I like it here, even though people like you are making it much worse than it was or needs to be. But you voted to abolish freedom of movement, brains, which means that people who might want to move to Germany or France will now find it incredibly hard compared to what it was like before. And that's down to you. But I suspect if I still need to explain this to you at 23 minutes after 12 today... after the last 4 years, then I am probably wasting my breath, at least as far as you're concerned. Hopefully, as a spectator sport, it remains passably enjoyable. And Julie makes an excellent point, which I will address directly, when she says it's much easier to feel ambivalent towards Brexiters when you are insulated from the worst effects. Many people will suffer far too much to easily forgive, even if they think forgiveness is laudable. And Julie's son depends upon medicine that comes from overseas, and at the moment comes frictionlessly into these islands from the European Union. Her concern is acute, sincere, and very, very real. And just in my defence, I'm not ambivalent, Julie, and this is why I don't want no deal. Because although no deal would give the I told you so balloon would be inflated to bursting point, no deal will be the ultimate proof of how profound this con has been. I am, as you point out, insulated from it. At least for now I am. If I get handed my sandwiches wrapped in a road mapper, then who knows where I'll be 6 months from now. Actually, that's, yeah. And that's why I can't join people who say, well, I just want no deal now so that everybody... Because it's a bit like when you're trying to toilet train a dog. Not that you actually toilet train dogs, but you take my point. And I think I've read that you rub the dog's face in its doings in order to teach it not to poo there again. That's what it feels like for me, the idea that, well, give them the no deal that they thought they wanted then, and then they can rub their own faces in it until they realise that that's actually not a very pleasant place to put your face. And I get that, and I understand it. I'm not going to argue with people who make that point, but I'm going to excuse myself from joining you on the grounds that it's not going to hurt me as hard as it's hurt all the people who've been abusing me for the last 4 years, or all the people on whose behalf I've made these arguments, who still think that I'm their enemy and Jacob Rees-Mogg is their friend. So I can't do that. I can't say, yeah, go and rub their faces in it until they realise what they've done, because I will be okay under no deal. It's odd, actually, that my resistance stroke understanding of this whole shebang has been built, and we're back to Catholicism perhaps and Christianity, built upon concern for other people rather than myself. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. I mean, if they were to hand out prizes and rewards for people who've been right about Brexit, you could make an argument that it's the best thing that's ever happened to me professionally. But I would still switch it all off and turn back the clock if I had a DeLorean sports car, and fix it all retrospectively. Imran's in Chadwell Heath. Imran, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
pleasure to speak to you again. Are we a nation of fish eaters?
We're not massive fish eaters.
Right, because the last time I remember eating any kind of fish was a tuna sandwich, and I think that must have been about 3 months ago.
No,
Can't
really?
even remember that.
I had fish and chips in the one over the 8 in Brentford on Saturday lunchtime.
Right, fair enough. I mean, I'm not a big fish eater.
What about prawns? Do you like prawns?
I do love prawns, actually.
Yeah, you see, you like a bit of prawn. I bet you had
do.
Well, that counts as a fish in the context of trade negotiations.
It does, but I can't remember the last time I ate any prawns either. I mean, it must have been 4 or 5 months ago. I honestly cannot remember.
So no, the point you're making is it seems odd that we give such enormous weight. This is a point I was nudging Mervyn towards earlier, and he did explain, to be fair, that his prioritisation of fishing is because he used to like looking at the boats from his plane as he flew over Grimsby, flew over the North Sea, which is an odd rationale, perhaps, for chucking trade on the table.
My question is this, though, James, right? I mean, the fishing industry accounts for about 0.1% of our GDP, right? We catch less fish from the French side than the Europeans do from our side of the water.
Yes.
Now, you said earlier we do export a lot of the fish that we catch.
Yes.
Right?
Partly because of the thing you've just touched on, is that the stuff that we catch is not as popular here as it is overseas.
Well, exactly. And let's not forget, the Europeans have to account for 8 other countries who are basically who place a lot of importance on this fish, where we are just speaking on behalf of ourselves.
Yes.
And where it only accounts for such a small proportion of our economy. So what I want to know is, why is it... I voted Brexit, but I voted Brexit on the basis that we would get a proper long-term trade deal, and it doesn't look like it's going that way. So what I want to know is...
We had a long-term trade deal, you lemonhead.
I know we did.
We had one of the best imaginable long-term trade deals, and you voted to tear it up and chuck it on the bonfire.
I know. I was attempting to be a loyal little citizen, but I know that turned out to be a total farce.
All right.
But,
go on.
But so what I want to know is why is the Conservative Party, why are they making this the hill that they're going to die on? Because the Europeans are not going to give way. They're not going to give way on this fishing thing at all, right? So what I want to know is what are they planning on? I mean, why are they going to literally just throw everything away over a bit of fish that we don't?
Well, you're being logical now, which, by your own admission, you weren't being when you cast your vote. You were being emotional when you cast your vote, and
absolutely.
That's why I have this contempt for the con, men compassion for the con. I don't think you did anything wrong. The more I learnt about it, Imran, the more I read into it and wrote about it, the more I marvelled at the fact that Remain got as much as 48% of the vote. If you've got Rupert Murdoch, the Barclay brothers, the Daily Mail and the Daily Express on one side, and me and Owen Jones on the other, it's a miracle that the media didn't lead more people down that path. Actually, I don't know if that's fair to Owen. Actually, me and Anna Soubry.
What do you think?
Well, hang on. So the answer to your question is twofold. The first is that in the original negotiations in the 1970s, we did actually give up fishing rights on a scale that is a little bit unbalanced. It is the one area where there is a valid argument for a rebalancing, but only, of course, as part of a rebalancing of everything. So so that's the problem, is that you can only make this argument about fishing when you close your eyes to the bigger picture. But at least that's better than all the other arguments, which you can't even make, regardless of what you do with the bigger picture. So you have that little sort of plausibility, credibility, validity of argument on fish. You know, and it's real. We can see it, and you can see fishing communities that have not got anything like the clout that they had, for example, in the 1960s. So that works. I always remember speaking to a woman who ended up in the Brexit party, I think, and she used to bring in from Lowestoft, and she was explaining that we'll be fine when we leave. For example, she had a big shipment of cockles on its way to South Korea that day. We don't need the European Union. Then I got a message immediately afterwards saying, actually, the European Union has just signed a trade agreement with South Korea, and that will be why it's much easier to... So it was the clash of emotion with logic. And the other thing is that it's all that's left. So this was why 3 years ago when I started, or 4 years ago, when I started saying it will all come down to fish and blue passports, I was kind of wrong about the passports. That ship has sailed. But fish is all that's left. It's the only thing left you can point at and say, well, I understand fish. I don't understand anything else, but I understand fish, and that's why it's become fetishized.
Yep. No, well, I agree with you, James. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well,
don't know what's going to happen.
No, and there you go, another lever there. Obviously repenting, but always welcome on this programme. I tell you what, you would not believe, and this makes me feel bad, actually, how many people have discovered for the first time today that we are both a net importer of fish, i.e. we bring in more than what we ship out, but also that we ship out way over half of what we actually catch. Which is kind of what free trade means, you know? But there we go. I guess maybe the way to unlock it all is to ask you whether you really care about the nationality of the fella that caught the fish you're having for your tea tonight. Maybe it's that. Oh, it tastes so much nicer when it's... Because I think there's a lot of... Filipino fishermen on British boats now. Because it's back-breaking work. It's a bit like coal mining. You can get all misty-eyed about it until someone actually invites you to do a shift or three. So that that is why I feel guilty's a bit strong. But, you know, if anyone could have made you aware of these facts regarding fishing, it was probably me. It's too late now. But yeah, we bring in more than we ship out, but we ship out way over half, 452 over 622,000 million of what we catch. Strange times, isn't it? 12:38 is indeed the time. Let's crack on with the calls. A couple of phone lines free on this. I was going to, but your appetite for having this conversation has proven almost insatiable, so we'll probably postpone it until tomorrow, announcements notwithstanding. But I'm hearing an awful lot of people expressing surprise from continental Europe at the way the conversation is still being conducted in this country. So the question of how it is being reported overseas, how it is being reported over there, is of interest. I mean, Frenchy McFrenchface, which I think is possibly a made-up name, suggests that it's barely getting any mention at all, and someone's replied to that tweet by saying it's the same in Germany. We're mostly just laughing. I don't know if that's true. 2 tweets does not a data make. So I might do that tomorrow. We had some great calls, some great phone-ins over the last couple of years by simply casting our net a little further than usual and saying, how is this looking from where you are? Not just expats, of course, or immigrants, but also residents and natives of other European countries. I just sense that there's a sort of, it's already been priced into your calculations, a lot of this. And whatever is announced this week, you're well, I don't know. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I think we might do that tomorrow, if someone reminds me. All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you'd like to contribute today. I just need to send out a special message for Jules, who I think has texted by accident. Jules, if you are listening, then you've sent this message, call me before you buy anything at Waitrose, to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't currently know anyone called Jules, so I'm fairly confident that message was not meant for me, and I have this terrible image of whoever it was meant for, wheeling an enormous trolley around Waitrose, filling it up with food that you don't actually need or want them to buy anymore. So if you know someone called Jules who might be sending you a message about Waitrose, give them a ring. And if you are Jules and you have just sent somebody a message about Waitrose, you've sent it to the wrong person. You've sent it to the wrong James, or indeed the wrong LBC. 12:40 is the time. Dave's in Epsom. Dave, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning to you. Just to confirm, I'm a Brexiteer.
Okay, that's why you said good morning, I think, isn't it? At 20 to 1 in the afternoon.
Morning.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
It's always a good morning. Always a good morning, except when it's not.
Yeah, except for when you've been holding since the morning. There you go. No, not to worry.
That's all right, mate.
We
can all tell the time.
I don't believe in a federal Europe.
Okay.
Hence, I voted for Brexit.
What does federal mean?
Too much control by Brussels.
No, doesn't. What do you mean when you use the word federal?
Fine. Well, that's where it's the direction of it's going.
No, but I just want to know what you think the word means.
Okay. Was being controlled by a central point.
No. It means the precise opposite of that, actually. It means a sharing of control. But you tell me again what you think it means.
Right. Federal Europe.
Yes.
I don't believe in.
No, but what does federal mean?
I know all the leaders have come together, like, for example, this budget.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you again, what do you think federal means?
Centralised. Too much centralised direction.
Right. Well, if I told you it doesn't mean that, how long would it take you to wonder whether you're... No, you wouldn't? No. Not going to cut any mustard?
No.
No? Don't know what it means, adamant that I don't like it.
And you mentioned fisheries that everyone keeps talking about.
They do, yeah. I wish they'd stop.
Do you believe that Europe is correct to try to keep the status quo?
Do I believe that Europe is correct to try to keep the status quo? I don't really understand the question, Dave, sorry.
Right, they want to maintain the common fisheries policy.
Well, they will maintain the common fisheries policy. We just won't be in it anymore.
Yes, they can maintain that.
So they've got control. They've got control over that.
Not with our waters.
Not with our waters.
My question is, why does Norway have an arrangement with the EU and they keep 85% and they do annual
because that's
quotas?
What they've negotiated, and Norway remains. Norway remains in. I always get confused here. You'll tell me. Is it the customs union or the single market that they're still in?
Customs union.
And we're not. You see. So there's your answer.
Yes.
Next question.
Next question. So we're right to seek. We are.
But you've just compared us to Norway when we've left the customs union, so that one doesn't float, does it? To keep the maritime analogies rolling.
We can carry on negotiating.
No, we can't, though, can we? Because we leave at the end of this month.
There is no reason.
Yes.
If we've left as a sovereign country.
Yes. What do you think sovereign means?
We control our waters. They're our waters.
Yes.
They shouldn't be decided by the EU.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
This type of fishery, I think it's a silly argument regarding fisheries.
Well, then why are you making it?
The EU, well, because you mentioned it when the...
Not in this call, I didn't. In this call, I just want to know what federal means.
So you don't want to discuss my reason why
Well, you just said you didn't want to discuss fish.
I believe that the
EU
is getting too centralised.
Yeah, I know you do, mate, but there's no evidence to support that. So let's conclude with a classic, shall we, Dave? What are you most looking forward to about not being in the EU anymore? Presuming that you're not actually one of the 12,000 people who currently work on our fishing fleets.
Rules and regulations.
And now we go for the absolute jackpot. Which rule are you most looking forward to not having to obey anymore, Dave?
Everything.
Yeah, but just give me one.
We decide.
Just give me one, Dave.
We decide
one rule, Dave.
as a country.
Dave, one rule.
Any
yeah, I know, any rule. Yeah, exactly.
Whether it's labour, whether it's trading standards.
Yeah, exactly. So go on, give me one. What trading standard? Go. Which one?
Doesn't matter which one. All of them.
Yeah, but just name one.
We're a leader in the world, right?
Are we?
We don't need the EU to tell us how to do things.
So what do they tell us? What is the rule you're most looking forward to not having to obey anymore?
All of them.
Yeah, so just name one.
Self-decision.
I know. So it'd be really easy to... I know what the problem is here. There's so much... Corporation tax is inflicted on us by the European Union.
No.
So that's not it then. What?
They took Ireland to court.
Yeah?
Their corporation tax.
Right.
To get 13 billion, and they lost.
And Ireland is desperate to stay in the European Union, so that's a fairly rubbish example. What's the rule?
With a no deal, if you watch RTE, they're desperate for a deal. Because of the effect of a no deal.
That's right, Dave. And they say the only people it'll be worse for than Ireland... Dave, the only people it'll be worse for than Ireland... is the UK.
Speak to the Germans,
are you going to name a rule?
Dutch, speak to the Belgians, speak to the Italians.
That's a bit federal. That's a bit federal, isn't it? Listening to all the other people in the European Union.
I'm talking about the people. They want a deal.
Right, but you don't.
Right. No, I said I hope we get a deal.
Right.
But it's got to be what we want to achieve, not just what they want to achieve.
And before you go, can you name one rule that you are looking forward to not having to... obey anymore?
All of them.
Yeah, can you name one though? It's not a no. Listen, I'll say it again. Can you name one rule that you don't like?
Refugees.
Refugees is a rule.
That's why Hungary and Poland is.
But they're still in the EU.
Refugees in.
So it's the refugees. There we go, mate. We got there in the end. We got there in the end. And, you know, when I asked you whether Norway was...
How did you get there?
Well, it's always about refugees with people like you.
I ain't worried about... I'm not worried about immigration.
Oh.
But we said...
So it's just the really desperate foreigners you don't want coming in here?
Right?
What?
Everyone always... particularly people like yourself who haven't got a clue.
I know, Dave, because I'm so stupid, I thought Norway was in the single market.
But the problem, what I said,
Dave, mate, I think I can only give. Yeah, but
we're in the same position negotiating.
All right, mate.
Right?
You look after yourself, Dave. Just in case you embarrass yourself anywhere else later today, it's the single market that Norway is in. So the answer to your question of why we can't have a similar fishing arrangement to them. Oh, I give up. Well, how much progress have we made? I think, oddly, I don't think anyone listening to this can be under any illusions at all as to how we've ended up where we've ended up. Partly because of people who have intentionally helped us towards that conclusion, and partly because of people who have unintentionally helped us towards that conclusion. So with just 8 minutes of the programme remaining, I'll remind you of why we are where we are. It's a stool with 3 legs. One of those legs is the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms. Now, I didn't understand how fundamental that was to the European Union in 2015. I just didn't. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. And there was nothing in the British media or political establishment that could be even loosely described as cheerleading for European Union membership until the referendum was called. And then they got it horribly, horribly wrong. They completely failed to talk about the benefits of membership as opposed to the predicted negatives of leaving, which left the door wide open for Project Fear rhetoric. And just because Project Fear is now Project Here doesn't change the simple fact, the simple arithmetic of that statement. So that's leg number 1, the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms. Leg number 2 is going to be the fact that membership of this club involves every member obeying the same rules in the same way. There are no exemptions. There is no special treatment. That is the second leg of the stool. And the third is the Good Friday Agreement, the necessity of retaining regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. So those three legs, any single one of them removed, and the stool is no longer a stool. It's a lump of wood. And that's it. There it is. It's been clear for 4 years. It's why people like me, smug and annoying though it may be, have explained to you tirelessly why eventually all that they'll be shouting about is fish. Or rules that they can't name. But fish, most obviously. Fish. 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 Why? Well, an earlier caller, lovely bloke, again, not his fault, he's ended up in this place. He really misses flying over the North Sea and seeing lots of boats coming out of Grimsby. That's why he wants to leave the European Union. I'm doing him a grave disservice, probably simplifying it thus, but, you know, you've got to keep an upbeat, happy spirit, haven't you? Even talking to Dave a minute ago, poor fella didn't even know what day it was, let alone what time it was, but he's adamant about things that he can't explain. And why would you ask him to explain them? Unless it was the entire country that was teetering on the edge of an utterly unnecessary precipice. And it makes me sound like a termagant. I demand some evidence for your opinions. How dare you infringe my freedom of speech? I should be able to say whatever the hell I want without ever having to explain anything. It's ridiculous. And there you go. Now you know why we are where we are. No deal is better than a bad deal, isn't it? Until it actually comes to a choice between a bad deal and no deal, and then suddenly everyone realises that a bad deal is much better than no deal. Except the people who are so far up or down the rabbit hole that they can't even see that now. So what happens next? God only knows. Now, all I'd say is that signing to a poor deal, which is a hell of a lot better than no deal and a hell of a lot worse than what we've got now, depends upon Boris Johnson putting the national interest ahead of his own for the very first time in his life. Okay? So he might. He might. But it would be the first time ever that Boris Johnson had made a decision based on something other than what will be of most short-term benefit to Boris Johnson. So I don't know. But I still, and probably because I'm just as guilty of seeing what I want to see as anybody else is, I still think it's more likely than not. Or do I? I was 52-48 when I came on air this morning, thinking that no deal was more likely. I think I've gone the other way now as the programme comes close to conclusion. But look, I don't know. Call it 50-50. Frank's in Glasgow. Frank, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I'm calling in because I noticed so many English voices that are played in Scottish fishing rights.
Right.
The majority of these fish that are caught in the EU are in Scottish waters. And I'm listening to the English negotiators telling us that there's no way we are letting down our sovereignty. We're not having another country telling us what we do. Well, there's a sort of Scottish Parliament, doesn't have many powers, but they're about to be all stripped on the 1st of January when they leave. So we've been put in this most powerful devolved parliament in the world, but they can come and take every power away from us whenever they like. And Brexit, 62% of Scots voted to remain in the EU, which is incredibly high. And the Tory government, 37% of the votes said, no, it doesn't count. And if I can highlight democracy in Scotland here, I want you to imagine that every single Brexit vote cast was for remain. Scotland would still be getting dragged out against its will. So they're talking about sovereignty. Scotland's a sovereign nation and we're supposed to be in this agreement. Now, when we accepted the result of this referendum, which I don't think we should, because they broke the Purdah and they made a vow, and if anyone would care to look, they broke every single list that they promised Scotland within the vow. Every single one has been broken. But they said we wouldn't raise independence again until there's been a major change. Hey, here's a major change. We want to remain European. And again, the the English are telling us that it's good, Scotland. You want to be part of this group. Being part of this group is terrific. But not if it's the English group. It's just as long as we're in control.
I mean, what you remind,
Frank,
I sense if I don't jump in, then you're going to crash into Sheila's show, which is a testament to how much you've got bottled up. And what you've reminded the rest of us of, and perhaps those of us south of the border need reminding of this, is that all of the arguments that they have left to make in favour of this ludicrous act of national self-harm, they argue the opposite of, or they would be upside down in the context of Scotland's in the context of Scotland's future. So I thank you, mate, and I wish you'd got on a little earlier, because you're right, we should have reflected that a little more. I think Pete, I can give you about 30 seconds, because again, I know you've been waiting for a long time. Pete, what would you like to say?
Basically, I think England is exceptional because we like to talk about World War II and its triumphs and things, but we've completely forgotten the ideological
what we were fighting for.
Idea that what we were fighting.
Put your teeth back in and try again.
Yeah, thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just pure nationalism. Blame foreigners. We'll do better without them. They're holding us back. Things like that. And then they said, give us all the powers in the world so we can do it, when we're not chained and shackled. And, Enabling Act 1933 comes into mind.
Well, that number's probably a little bit strong, but at least I hope it is a little bit strong. But you leave me with little choice but to end the programme with that poster that we began it with. Before I do that, though, another text, because in the interest of balance, classic show, Dave O'Brien, I think Steve, I know Steve calls me Dave, Steve Allen affectionately, but the very, very hard of thinking believes that James is an invented name and that I was actually christened. Don't look at me like that, Sheila Fogarty. You don't deal with these people as much as I do. Classic show, Dave O'Brien insults, demeans, acts unprofessional. My God, I've never seen so many F's in that. Actually, you've spelt it unprofessional. A bully and a self-centred mug. At least he wasn't sucking his teeth like a geezer or talking about himself. Try as I do, I find no redeeming virtues. It is not about fish, but about territory with 5 R's. Don't let truth get in his way. If you're still confused about why Brexit is happening, my anonymous correspondent there has just driven the point home rather beautifully. And we'll end with that National Front poster from the 1970s. Stop immigration, reject common market, restore capital punishment, make Britain great again, scrap overseas aid and rebuild our armed forces. If only they'd known about footballers kneeling, they could have stuck that on their poster as well. While she's in